Hello and welcome to Crypto Novas. My name is Chris Brown and I'm your host for the channel for those of you who are new. Today I'm going to be doing a video on the Bitcoin price around April and May. And the reason for this is because it relates to the halving that occurred in 2020. I'm going to break the video up into three parts. We're going to look at how Bitcoin performed in 2020 in relationship to other assets. And we're going to look at how the Bitcoin market in general relates to other larger market classes, but the focus on the video is going to be how Bitcoin is going to perform in price relative to the halving. And we're going to take a deeper dive into this chart right here. But before we get into that, I want to give a shout out to Bitcoin IRA. If you have an existing IRA now, a self-directed IRA, or want to start one, I would highly recommend looking at this company. They can be found at bitcoinira.com. As always, I must say this video is not and should not be perceived as crypto investment advice. As always, do your own research before you make any kind of choices of investment in the crypto market. You need to understand the risks and you need to understand whether or not it works with your strategy for how you want to be successful in this market. Okay, let's jump into 2020 Bitcoin performance. Real quickly, I won't go into all the details on the chart. You can kind of read it yourself. But essentially what I did is I took a look at Bitcoin as it related to gold spot, silver spot, S&P 500 index, and the NASDAQ. And what I essentially did is I simply took a look at how the different assets started on the first day of the year, January 1st, and how they ended on the last day of the year, December 31st. In Bitcoin's case, it obviously outperformed all of them, as you can see. It basically last year, from the first day of the year to end of the day of the year, it rose 320%, or it did 3.2x. The year high for though, based on the yearly low and the year high, was as much as 475%. The only other asset that came close to that was silver. And silver basically had a rise of 46% throughout the entire year, and its yearly high and low change was 140%. The NASDAQ didn't do, the NASDAQ was the third one in line at 45% in terms of its overall change, and then from its year low to its year high, it was 84%. And that year low to year high was really significant last year, as we all know, because of the depression in the values of prices that happened in March due to coronavirus. This chart right here basically compares gold to Bitcoin and Bitcoin to the S&P 500, and you can clearly see the dip that happened in March that all assets experienced, but then you can see the orange line and how well Bitcoin outperformed both gold and the S&P 500. It's pretty amazing. So let's take a quick look at the halving price performance and how it relates to Bitcoin. What is a halving? The halving essentially was an event to where the reward for mining Bitcoin transactions was cut in half. Basically, miners were initially, before the halving that occurred on May 11th, 2020, they were given 12.25 Bitcoins per block, and now they're only getting 6.25. And the value and the importance of this is how it relates to supply and demand dynamics. There are four aspects to look at. One, it limits the amount of coins that are issued. It does restrain the crypto inflation. It contributes to the rise of the Bitcoin price. And it maintains miners' interest because, of course, as the supply of Bitcoin is decreased, the price goes up and therefore their reward goes up. At the time of the halving, the price was $8,804. This is a chart that takes a look at what happens to price action in Bitcoin 12 months before a halving and then 12 months after. So the blue line in the center is the halving moment and the price at halving. And then you can, of course, see 12 months prior to on the left and 12 months after to the right. What we're looking at is the third line down, which is the halving that occurred on the 11th. Our halving price was $8,800. And we have pretty much kind of performed similar to other years. Every year tends to be a little bit different, and we've got 2 months that are still outstanding. It's February and it's May. But you will notice that Bitcoin, after the halving, kind of performed the way it did at the first halving. We had 8% increase. First halving had 9%. The first halving was incredible in terms of the increases for months 3, 6, 9, and 12. What is interesting, what's happening to us, at our 6-month point, we were at an 85% increase, and that would be compared to the second halving in its 9 months. So our price is rising. And what you're going to see as the charts kind of continue is you're going to see that Bitcoin has a parabolic rise as it gets deeper into the bull run cycle. But the questions that we're asking is how much could it rise in months 9 and in months 12? So what we have here is in 2012, in month 9, we basically had a 9.4x in price increase. We didn't have quite as much. We had very little actually in 2016. But in 2020, we had in month 8, we actually had a price increase of 2.8x, which was similar to the 12-month action that we had in 2016. So we're seeing a nice increase. The question is, in month 9, can it do a 10x? And in month 12, can it do a 11 to 12x and reach $100,000? This is the chart that kind of shows how the parabolic rise happens after the halving. You can see it in both the first halving and in the second halving, and the red line's indicating what is possible in the third halving. So we're going to do a simple exercise, and the chart that we want to deeply look at basically takes and applies a growth trajectory on the first halving, and it applies a growth trajectory of the second halving onto one chart, and it takes a look at it. So when we look at what happens to the Bitcoin halving in terms of growth after 365 days after a halving, 2012 we had an 88x rise, and the peak was at 100x. On the 2016, much more shallow. It was only 2.8x at 365 days, but at the peak it went 25x. So it's indicating, or it's helping us see this parabolic rise that's going to occur. So here's the magical chart that was done, and we can kind of see a little bit. The blue shaded area is what's called the growth range defined by previous halvings. So it's the high and the low that was occurring as the market price was moving. The deeper blue line is the average growth in the previous halvings and how Bitcoin performed based on those highs and those lows. So let's take a closer look at this chart and kind of where we're at. So here we can see when the chart was done, which was December 17th of 2020, the perception at that point is that Bitcoin would reach 40,000 by the end of December. Well, that really didn't happen until January 8th. And so we can kind of see, I've kind of superimposed a red line there that meets us up to that point. What we do notice that on April 18th, which is a little bit longer than 365 days because the halving actually would be on the 11th, we see the price of Bitcoin being at 100, crossing over the 100,000 line. As you look at that blue line and the average, which is the average, it crosses the 100,000 mark on April 18th. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, what I can definitely see from this chart is that going up to 50, which is the next target, which everyone's really focused on, will kind of gradually move up to there. It looks like it'll get some sideways action. There'll be a little bit of a rise, probably towards the tail end of February, maybe to drop back down and touch on 50 in March, go up a little bit, go sideways, pump up a little bit, maybe to 60, 65,000, then drop down. And then after all that little sideways action with a little bit of a rise, then we see a parabolic almost all the way up to like 95,000, a retracement back, and then it crosses over in the middle of April into that 100,000, and then it's a very straight line parabolically up to a much, much higher price. This is what I'm referring to, and this is the information that I found extremely interesting because for me as an investor, I did not think that price of 100,000 would happen so quickly in this year. But it's all related to what Bitcoin has done in the past relative to a halving. What I can make of this is the following. If I look at Bitcoin and I say, okay, what could it possibly do? And I'm looking at this from a conservative point of view. If I start on the first of the year, it was at 32,000. If I look at the possible growth of where it could be based on the last chart I just looked at, on the 31st, it could be at 286,000, which is much larger than I anticipated. That's almost a 9x growth in 1 year's time. If I look at what's happening in April and May as an investor, I'm saying, okay, if we start at 32,000 to get to 100,000, that means that I would have to grow almost a little over 3x. And I think both of those are very possible looking at how Bitcoin performed last year. If I'm investing a small amount of money, given an illustration of 600, for the year, my 600 could turn into 5,300. If I'm just looking at an investment on the short term and looking at what could happen between now and April, I could invest 600 now and that could turn into 1,800. Both of those performances would be very receptive and acceptable to me. The last thing I want to look at in helping to establish value for Bitcoin is its asset value in comparison to larger markets. Bitcoin's value considerations, there's three things I think of. Bitcoin, one, has established itself as a store of value without a shadow of a doubt. And it's basically what I would consider a value anchor for the altcoins. The second is Bitcoin is scarce. There's been a lot of conversations. I've done a video on this. The original design was 21 million Bitcoin. There's actually going to be a little bit less. The supply and demand economics are in Bitcoin's favor. With more institutional and corporate investors buying into the hundreds of millions of dollars, they're holding their investments. Retail investors are holding their investments, which will only increase Bitcoin's price. What we're going to see next, though, is Bitcoin's market is small. As a digital gold, for its use case, Bitcoin is at the very early stages of adoption in the market, which means it has a long ways to grow. If Bitcoin was to reach right now the same market value as gold, it would have to increase an additional 20 times. Here's a quick chart that takes a look at it. Bitcoin at 40K. At that level, Bitcoin as an asset value is similar to what Facebook would be worth. It still has to climb above Google and Amazon and Microsoft. Once Bitcoin hits 100,000 plus, it now can be compared to Apple. It still has a long ways to go to get to gold, which you can see there at the top. In order to get to that level, Bitcoin's price would have to be around 600,000 per coin, which is an incredible amount of money. And, as time progresses, I can see that coming to pass. Real quick, the next halving happens in 2024. Again, the block reward would be cut in half again, and it'll be down to 3.125 Bitcoins per block. Plan B, a Bitcoin expert, gave us some projections of what they thought Bitcoin would be worth. Obviously, 100,000 after 2020 to 2024 halving. They're projecting it to be a price tag of 400,000. And then after the 2028 halving, as much as 3 million. I think that last video kind of shows where this is headed and what the value is. It really reinforces this year and the fact that Bitcoin is going to see some exponential growth this year. And I'm going to continue to do more videos with it. So I hope you found this information to be helpful. Again, this is Crypto Novus. Please subscribe to the channel. The community is definitely growing, and I would definitely love to have you be a part of it. If this video information was of value to you, please hit the like button as well. Remember, this is Crypto Novus, where newbies become masters. I'll see you in the next video.